think I have some of these.
If you don't, no, it's on the.
Yes, I do.
Okay. Thanks. Go crazy.
Okay, did everyone get the one AC?
Uh-huh.
I'm sure you did. Awesome. The United States federal government should substantially increase its protection of water resources in the United States by clarifying the decision in county planning of wildlife and the advantages and innovation of the Supreme Court ruled in favor of environmental groups in county planning of wildlife funds started stating that discharges into groundwater that require MBA permits if they're the functional equivalent of a direct discharge. But ambiguity over the 7-factor test leads the industry unsure for the scope of permitting that shift from River 20. Homer Slauson Necessary County by functional equivalent neither affecting her sector personally declared determination what it is not a functional equivalent 7 factors themselves not compel result. Difficulty to deal with mental instances, sector objectives cannot provide guidance. The lack of core guidance drives mass litigation, regulatory uncertainty, pressures every industry that's featured 20. In valuations, what is to be restricted by points to charges in the groundwater require all MBS for direct discharges and functional equivalent direct discharge. Protective providing list of factors could be relevant prevent nuclear guidance and inconsistent application of anybody's guess how parting regime of fundamental instances case various factors to make it difficult to predict like predictability have consequences for industries. Functional equivalent could require permitting obligations for oil and gas production, chemical industry, and manufacturing, among others, given the enormous cost of compliance and non-compliance must be clearly enabled of regulated entities in terms whether permit is required not an utterly unpredictable standard that forces issues between costly permit massive fines and for production that implicated in the standard for lasting implications. The decision rejected industry preferred approach and leaves the potential for over-enforcement that's government side 20. Decision rejects the industry preferred approach and by one self-supporting rulings of victory industry despite potential impacts devastating for industry and lawyers for utilities, energy, and other industries expecting parts of meaning of court's definition for use company industry litigation to interpret what functional equipment means. Lawyers engage in culture more time defending litigation about that over questions by courts who test make it difficult for parties to predict whether they must seek a permit. The plan's modest increase in regulation solves clarity is significantly better for business than total regulatory retreat than San Herman 18. Amount decision creates uncertainty that exposed regulation being liable and cause that on-face regulatory retreat may seem to benefit business in reality would not deregulate risk creating uncertainty that the regulating community needs except like wildlife become more problem to a clear failure. It doesn't help businesses because regulation against bid may bring citizens lawsuits to enforce unpermitted discharges of non-MPS permitted discharges put the liability into the rising fire statement should clarify groundwork and provide discharges with the greater certainty that the community benefit from unambiguous directives as potential increase in citizen lawsuits. Every community gains a little from the ABS anticipated retreat going uncertainties of the exacerbated by changing administrations for now awarded discharges are common absurd situation to apply if either applying for a costly permit or risking citizen lawsuit after the clarity regulated community and remain per ambiguous statute. Otherwise cost all economic recovery and constrain U.S. competitiveness internationally. That's Sergeant 18. Regulating deal with pollution that they're overly complex and socially relevant for small businesses because they incur fixed costs and regulations are most important to production processes, hiring, expansion, investment, improve business investment, lift the growth rate. Water pollution is extremely complex and can need bureaucracies incur high costs and is very litigious and high cost compliance and make American companies less competitive internationally. Post-COVID economic rebound secures geopolitical dominance, alternatives, global conflict, EU plots, and Chinese authoritarian dominance. That's count 20. The risk of conflict not because with geopolitical consequences of post-COVID-19 risk could determine whether the U.S. retain leadership efficient leverage faster recovery could determine the EU collapses could trigger escalating conflicts start recovery related diseases for less and shift to China the U.S. The evergreen leadership is community power being the first of the capable be significant that is like to be China that goes nuclear. That's Allison 17. When rising power threatens the ruling power, alarm should sound that the reviewing past 500 years found 16 Newton, which Newton tries to disrupt and dominate the outcome necessitated world war. This is about the impact of a rising China global order and overall space firm led by a weapon to find the world order in there without war. Among great powers increasingly powerful, China is unraveling this, throwing into question the peace leader. Leaders are driven by ambition, having fired up national support at home, and more important than sparks are the structural factors in which otherwise manageable events can escalate when a rising power threatens the structural stress and make a violent clash. The role that the Chinese economic development is transforming a formidable military competitor from competing SES, ECS, and cyberspace to a trade conflict as far as out of control disease and developed series of nuclear adventure. The beauty of the application of the functional code has taxed the mining industry that's come strips and shells at 20. Mountain create uncertainty reminding the functional code stress of red little gotta stick create uncertainty and C to A, KBC bins and strike liability regime, technical less than clear test discharging important mass electric water might be set in regulation, regular parties feel case by case basis where the cost of uncertainty are so great mining companies have been swept in immediate fallout. The environmental groups are already sent ruling, especially REM since I was 13. Over Earth, mining approximately thousands of human radioactive elements into groundwater. The U.S. is rebounding the REM market, but consistently expanding mining is key. That's Statement 21. The U.S. Supreme Court top of player supply chain underground and efforts to renew the path and hardline and China that about next 3 million securing supply chain for REMs that rebuilt the entire supply chain is when the U.S. can quickly kill pressing for fighting competing costs with China with market dominated by China. Critical mineral shortages, class tech primacy. That's Green 18. Minerals are been lost familiar carbon type superiority hinges on reliable access to key materials without access and doesn't hit their targets are custom subsoil and penetrating making the minerals problem has gone from bad to worse. U.S. tech leaders themselves to every existential risk. This J19. AI 3D printing design engineering directed energy IoT 5G space cyber the curves autonomous weapons turning the creators of the human extinction that the effort 3D printing print WMD spur nerves and proliferation engineering super works and recognizing undermining global stability criticism the risk autocracies with new tech race in China mastering tech before the democratic core basically rapid shift and balance of power upsetting global strategic stability. Chinese technological rise is demonstrably worse. It causes global instability and conflict. That's a Dow 21. If China remains the international orders won't be ready, the PRC will be demonstrably worse. China's only capable of economic and technological power to mount a challenge to the stable international system that the weaker genocide that the Beijing is forced 1 million into infrastructure reset to the first labor and just persecution is increase of the hundreds of thousands of subject China PRCs using mechanism basis to monitor every aspect of life and sanction subjects are while in surveillance and Catholic torture the seizing foreign lands annexing waterways and pandemic that is close to controlled ECS in Fate Company faction affecting Hong Kong first and Taiwan next Beijing is building an authoritarian bloc that PRC is the intention of the new world the alliance unparalleled prosperity and remission crave our worth the order reduce conflict and make cooperation possible. China willing to use coercion liberal orders prevent peace but it doesn't run on autopilot at the turning point either the preserve the order of Beijing will transform it. Next is solvency. The effort fights ambiguity by instituting homework lesson functional equivalent test that prevents case-by-case analysis and clearly prescribes when terms are needed.
I'm sending yours now.
That Schiffer over 20. Magnebusa and non-substitutes and popularly relevant practices is not satisfying to avoid case-by-case basis homework lesson cutting by determined if clues bear the hallmarks of having been written from point source to the configured discernible combined and discrete conveyance distributed functional equivalent gloss against lower court CP and citizens. Communicating risk is productive. Inaction is worse. Only debating risk mobilizes effective action. This Kurosawa 04. Trying to analyze what may occur of the aim to increase what is happening in breaches risk management either offended or fatalism will do endeavors are essential for these spark ideas but possible futures that transcend the existing affairs dystopian imaginary can lay the foundation of constructive engagement with the future that can what might occur given the crisis of nuclear ecological apocalypse funds to crises is on everyone's lives and dystopian imaginary can enable a novel form of action that can be that can be profound foresight. Profound foresight is dialogical address and response. Mark part response.
Cool. Gift for drops?
Yeah.
Last part on the original document for solvency specifies that the act rectifies ambiguity, and the card goes on to say that we create a case-by-case basis for the application of the Maui principle. I'm confused as to how that's any more clear than the ambiguous standard before.
It's the opposite. We take away the case-by-case basis.
Cool. So what standards are implemented by the gap?
Yeah, sure. So the hallmark law says that if a pollutant bear the hallmarks of having been emitted from a point source, which would be being conveyed through discernible confinement, discrete conveyance, going through groundwater and ending up in surface water, then it would be covered under the CLD law.
Cool. What does the app do to materially improve correlate?
What's up?
What does the app do to materially improve correlate?
We think preventing extinction is like a net positive.
The accommodation for poor people by effect of saving everyone is what you claim is how you help poor people.
I don't think that the 1AC takes a specific stance on that. I mean,
Cool.
we
I guess
presented a plan that we think is good,
Good.
provided reasons why that's good.
The card that you read after the fact in the extra document about communicating risk. Why is communicating risk good if the endeavors that this is referencing initialize a process of actually implementing the policy?
Initialize a process. Why is it good if they do initialize that process?
Right. The Kurzweil card is in specific reference to the ability to mediate the claim afterwards. After this round, no one implements the policy. So why is this card contextual towards the reading of the affirmative?
So I do think that it is true that the Kurzweil evidence talks about the effect of like communicating risk on implementing policy. It also says that even without the context of implementing policy, it still says that the sort of like the address and response process is a beneficial process.
It's more about the benefits of tying risk to pragmatic action that can solve
But
them.
you don't do that pragmatic action, so what is the net benefit for your performance?
Again, the Kurzweil evidence isn't just about actualizing.
Cool, but I'm asking, even
like,
if that's like, if that's especially the case, then what is the net benefit?
The Kurzweil evidence speaks sort of broadly to why
This should be a
the
very
communication
simple
of risk
question,
is good.
This should be a very simple question. If it's not a question of implementation, what is the benefit that comes from your performance of the app?
We think there doesn't have to be an external benefit to this round. Simply proving that the app is a good idea is sufficient.
Okay,
But
what
the
does
Kurosawa
proving that the
evidence
app is
describes,
a-
yeah, the Kurosawa evidence
What does
describes how tying risk to action is good.
Well,
because
probably
it's
should move on. What does
towards
proving
risk.
the app is good do? What does that mean? Why is that beneficial? And why shouldn't there be an externalized benefit to that?
I mean, we think that the process of deciding certain things are good or bad.
Deciding certain things, then why the app?
I think that the app is one of those things. Like, I mean,
That's nebulous.
We've read advantages and harms that the app claims to solve. We think we've written to solve them. Good thing. Oh, sorry, the chain's now titled app disclosure, by the way. I didn't think to change that.
It's one.
One, like, should we just flow it? I see the docs is on case, or do,
Flow whatever you want to.
like,
We suggest case straight up.
Ready?
Yep.
Okay.
10 minutes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Okay. Thought you, but I want.
You sure?
The afterlife ecology thirst presuming the usage of traditional water can restore human status to blackness in the linear temporal fantasy. The ability to redistribute water does not rename a measurable life suffering but privileges man's control over the environment, which makes anti-black resource distribution inevitable. In Turk's case, the only slave ships thrive on the ecology thirst. Humanity measures through one's relation to water. The same possibility related to water assistance department for human. The need for water manifests in thirst. Despite this, market life slave thirst and experience of water were mediated by the ancient shore of the boundaries of the human. The thirst of the slave was a constant reminder of what she shared through the church. The others have found insufficient. There may have been no legal justification. Thirst and justification of Zox masters to be human requires that one being more than sure is lost water, all present struggles with respect to embrace class sugar, struggles with environment, unequal nutrition, resources are all classes of advantage, human struggle, even though brain have real punches of those salt water supplies was not enough to prevent from flowing to slaves over abolitions, record emphasize number of slaves, confined the events, or long to specific temporal women, result by abolition itself, the slave services, similarly the consequence of resource scarcity, redistribution, the attenuating something is the time limit of non-slave can be measured by elimination of thirst, the slave, to find their illness first will always remain that racialized water not only became graphic treating the slaves as less than human, but also predicted the value created by the true. It's totally surprising. In his water crisis, Troy became privatization, water ecology, thirst guarantees the ability to control water, and disallowing from that relationship remains the hallmark of man. The absence of geological coding of black flesh through ecological finitude facilities, and then perpetuates anti-black subjugation because the language of materiality and humanism creates a division of life and non-life, in which black is merely reduced to inhuman vegetable flesh and property through extractive modes of disposition. The Anthropocene is, if you've heard the very understood geology is a machine for producing subjects of material worlds, which establishes power. The order and division of subjects is inhuman and human operations is the reason why geology makes sense of logical sediment structure for black and brown bodies and geological language coded in human evidence across flesh. Geology is a signifier which backs the removal semiotics of why geology creates ancient world materiality dislocated and replaced by political category of not being established to same being exchanged by the forward as gold. Slavery was a geologic axiom. It was not that being was made as regulated as flesh, the murder not being concluded as straight wrong. This demonstrates monstrous consistency where bodies with a surplus of geological abstraction, the race, the spatial disposition of land, the disposition of the person are active the slave. This record does matter through any human property relation, what's hard to call abilities and body with properties, but without subject to will or agency, rhetoric, substance in human matter, the facility of extraction as person is the quality of geology, the rational and legal grammar of justice is unethical and materializes the simplest hated or violence of the logic of overkill, born overkill exceeds the logic of utility, physical death is not sufficient even after biological function. The aggressor can be used to mutilate the body through plus violence, attempts to push careers out of time and devices that devices to consider the inadequacy of redress, e.g. rights equal protection, what cannot rely on rational instruments, this will result in irrational dilemma, any solution would have to reside outside of reason that overkills the state society, and without it, its institutions will cease to exist, all legal instruments reproduce it as non-violence, but there is a difference between the conclusion of justice as it concerns anti-human violence and the grammar of suffering that career erosion recuperation separates the irredeemable from the derelict object, overkills the materialization of one society is not generalizable, so the queer population overkill cannot be recuperated into the grammar of justice lacking utility, hence black queer, into an infinite ontological ring structuring new world attacks extinction not unique, placing in the future being ecological device over the ongoing black apocalypse that produce environmental anthropocene ethics and exceeds utility career and social attacks along racial lines which be never displaced in an ethic of future or even mention of a future people as solutions to ecological device control for getting the making of another people by slavery and condition make black and death ungrateful, that lays fish across the Mediterranean border fortunes of the EU, necessity one to game over death. To the dimensions of possibility of a future for the black philosopher is always works to align herself with this future terms, register anti-black violence and violence, and remain suspicious of the hasty affirmative politics of life, profoundly unequal to recognize the mandates ways in which extinction already constitutes existence for the fundamental being. They violate spectacularity of Frederick Smith, indicate ontological violation of preconditions of the energy that exceeds utility is indispensable for the human to maintain experience of its institutions. Time does not pass with the concession of the progress and accumulates still 13. Progress is central to liberal conception of time, progress and reformer temporality used by the state to justify violence under justice to temporarily to those who refuse to wait to respond. While stat shows support why feminism aligns itself with the state through Western time gender race built into everyday life undoes progress. Time passage is intensification of subjugation for those very white heteropatriarchy to pass from future, not to seek temporal spaces. Time does not pass, it accumulates particles repeated endlessly across the space of time and the present, debating the future to a heteronormative white world will lead to the death of more clear views of time. Does not pass, but accumulates in the future is not undoing of the present, engaging critics undermines normative logic and sequence to deploy an anti-seeking temporality where one can engage goes not yet here. The future will be what it was before. Those state promises in the future there will be an anti-sexual violence and wretched exists in a temporal regime apart from the nation. The future looks like the repetition of the death of Matthew Shepard. Black bounding is a living laboratory. Hero sense of utility eclipses black body for the ultimate equipment to secure their relationship with humanity's desires and values, which renders any care and value for blackness abject as modernity. Murderous operations continue. Born 18. Before the body there is a flesh that's hero. The degree of social conceptualization does not escape concealment under reflexes of iconography. Flesh and body are philosophical allegories for the execution of eating the flesh. It's a primary relation that ancient life is worth tiles and destroyed African existence and fight greatest from the resources is wiped out during the translated slavery. The body emerges from the ashes of the Holocaust. Thus, high crimes against the flesh are murderous operations. The same modernity and devotion remain unintelligible within the species. It exists as a thing being for the captors of inhabited mode of existence dominated by introducing use and function. Utility eclipses the thing itself. Anti-black neos systematically obliterate the flesh and true oppose nothing else but that obliterates space, care, and value are obsolete in this entire black use across every equipmental assignment, making it the ultimate equipment black being as a living laboratory that considers the human itself, the fungibility of the body, makes it like having the body an empty vessel vulnerable to the predictions of other feelings, desires, and values that using the seek involuntary labor and economic interest. It is this particular anti-black use of philosophical discourse has neglected both the judge to vote from this to think from the position of on decide the ballot signals an orientation to strategy as of intersectional understanding for black queer bodies. This analytic procedure allows us to start from the core body for how we evaluate strategies for engaging World War 17. On decide is a procedure of negotiating with humanism. The erasure point is designed to signal an operation through ontology. On decide highlights a ban of blackness and intersectionality possible. And on decide erasure would highlight the death of blackness at the center of humanism. On decide provides a procedure for negotiating violence because it allows us to conceptualize the fracturing within the fundamental and the specificity of the violence system commodity experience only in the world would destroy humanism. The erasure highlights highlights the inherent violence within humanist language. It is a strategic alignment with the solution with the dual purpose of critiquing humanism and providing conformative contradictions that silence violence against fungible objects. This is not meant to be for inclusivity, not just scientific practice. Would provide an intellectual space for a certain form of suffering to indicate the fungible commodity without a violence become silence. Although pessimism does not embrace fungible liberation, Omnicide would wish to consider the necessity of the proposition. Thus, flows from such abuse make it feel more appropriate to the fungible commodity. Omnicide would expose a man at the center of the field and imagine utilizable material to articulate the density of life suffering. Omnicide is a way to think about think through ontological implications of violence and the way to structure the fungible commodity. Omnicide refuses the mythological temptation to understand life through maneuvers and influence. Omnicide strategically erases the lies difference to explain about violence fracturing the fungible commodity. Any link means you vote neg, repeating anti-coordinates is internalized epigenetically and creates adverse health impacts we can't even begin to comprehend. LGBTQ nation in 2020. All single instances of anti-LGBTQ discrimination by knowledge or persons at that epigenetic for repeated exposure to such mistreatment certainly can have reasons. It's discriminating against even once it's likely to live in an environment which regularly face anti-LGBTQ hostility, whether overtly or subtly. LGBTQ people can utterly suffer from CPTSD, involves in ongoing and inescapable cycle of trauma. CPTSD change persons' epigenetics suggest complex health impacts of queerphobia. It's stressful life experiences, harm persons' epigenetics that suggests that affirming life situations can also repair the damage limiting and supportive environments can not only improve the characteristics of life lives of the generations that follow them. Gut check, they do not solve the tech leadership impact. Jane is about AI independently of human use, so any AI should be sufficient to cause it. Techno-oriental fears of Chinese authoritarianism and xenophobia, threats to democracy is constructed, which deflects criticism of the U.S. surveillance that rose democracy, turns their norm-setting internal standing Jew of 20. China watches focusing on authoritarian policies, trying out separate voices, the lens of the authoritarianism has the West self-imagination, so demanding the completion of xenophobia to affirm its moral superiority. Surveillance has led to worries that skepticism about China electricity to affect the nation's democratic countries' anxiety as digital surveillance aids over the capacity of the Chinese state for controlling flows of info medicines of UCP and grassroots to the political public does not allow educated African colonies of transferred to the imperial center. The fear of authoritarianism policies to deflect the domestic pressure which inflates anti-China racism. These undermine global cooperation and an equal world. The theory of based conflict presumes the sovereign country whose system relies on colonized zones of Jew defines and property formation. So subject of IR theory depends on the asymmetrical security order of nation states. Advocates include 11 critical theorists in IR that deal with universalization as not global because it presumes the S structuring is subject to policy ontologically property. Whatever is what began with the violence of the Russian war demands and claims cannot be satisfied by transferring ownership within existing structures. Phenomena begins with an imperial order of Serbian colonization and humanist interventions claiming to exist sovereign subject. The constitution of the subject depends on the asymmetrical security order. This violence is possible. The civil space and security for the sovereign species occupied them are white and belong to a given race of gratuitous violence positions. The establishment of gratuitous violence positions, the species and the colonizing creation of colonizers, the interstate states, and racialized audience, and property relation, providing the right and construct a number of ethical order. This order is secondary subject from recognition of species, for the subject of position to the interstate structure of world and sovereign protection able to take by force.
I could potentially just mark that able to take by force.
And that was the.
That's fine, sure.
Okay.
Cool. You good?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Awesome. So you say that the ballot signals an orientation to a strategy of intersectional understanding for Black queer bodies. Why is that the only thing that the ballot can do?
Well, we never said it does, we just said the ballot.
Okay.
Like this is just like a
it's
vote
not.
nay if you think it's like I don't understand. Like we have not said the ballot only resolves on society. Like
You said that the ballot should prioritize an ontological analysis.
it's just like a vote.
Okay. What does prioritizing on societal analysis looks like?
Well, so we think on side is the double fatality of the Black queer that's not, kind of reconcilable by humanism and ontology. We think if we want to link argument, it should go negative because that would prioritize on side in this academic procedure.
Okay. Sure. The Carrera evidence. What does the Carrera evidence say that we should do about broader geopolitical conflict? Should we do anything about things like
We
civilian
don't have to
casual?
care about geopolitical conflict.
Don't care about it.
No.
Okay. Should anyone care about geopolitical conflict?
Not
Or
a
is-
political simulation of debate.
So debate should not care about geopolitical
We think
conflict.
debating about political simulations of extinction are bad.
Sure. Just of extinction or political simulations?
Well, both.
Okay. Why is debating about extinction uniquely bad, I guess?
So our Warren evidence says it crowds out the grammar of overkill, which is the idea of the logic of utility, something that goes beyond biological death that exceeds political economic explanations. We think that is bad because the Black Poor is cut in a way beyond biological injury because there's literally mutilation that happens to Black bodies.
Sure. Okay. I do want to talk. I do want to talk about the Warren card. Why does talking about extinction trade off with talking about other forms of violence?
Well, it is that literally universalizing notion. I.e., it's like we all follow under this notion of biological extinction, which our Warren evidence says is insufficient to understand the grammar suffering. Warren makes the trade-off argument by saying that there are distinctions between.
Okay, Warren says that different groups
I mean,
of
like,
people
also we have, like,
experience extinction in
many
different
other extinction
ways.
cards. We've got like 4 in one.
I didn't know you were a Warren scholar, but Warren's argument is fundamentally that overkill necessitates a prior to biological sort of necessitated violence that exceeds the capacity for extinction to cohere itself in this
Right.
first.
We have said that fundamentally that grammar suffering is distinct, and Warren makes that argument.
Okay, sure. The card about xenophobia, why does the affrate, like, is any,
You literally describe China as an Orwellian fantasy.
I don't think that's true,
The,
but
the,
is
the card
any-
you read says Orwell.
Sure, I get, the card might say Orwell, but does any description of like Chinese tech practices as like undesirable?
You said China is way worse.
Like this thing is,
This-
it's like an
Like, I've heard this shit so many times, I'm just so fucking tired of this. Like, it's so ridiculous that, like, people are still saying this shit about China. It's, like, actually crazy to me.
Cool. Are we doing 10 minutes or 8 minutes? I did
Tournaments is
10.
really?
We did
Yeah.
8
We
minutes.
did 8
now.
minutes for literally every round, so.
All right.
We should do 10.
Well, if it's cool with y'all, you
Go.
can have, I think that's the. I believe that's the with that. Okay, we'll start back now. I just need to.
So tired.
Does anyone need snacks? I'm going for a coffee refill down to mysterious
find-
kitchen area.
If there's a water bottle, I haven't been able to find it.
Yeah, there's some in the fridge.
Did you see Sure, sure.
I really appreciate it. They're just the middle ones.
It's like-
but yeah, they got.
In the kitchen, there's a fridge?
Yeah, there's a fridge in the kitchen.
Alright.
Actually, so much of this is just so fucking racist, bro. Bro, this is fucking.
No, it doesn't.
Well, Jack was coming in, I was wondering.
Okay. 8:53 left.
Computer's about to install an update. Popped up and said, ready to restart now.
No.
It will never come back.
You said you ended, bro?
Yeah, I ended prep. It's sent out now.
It's never coming back. If it shuts down, it's gone forever.
Look around, I saw online. It's not required.
I got real tired of the Berkeley Prep show.
Oh, some
It is
rows
a
where she
show.
just.
Was it interesting
she
for the
responds to
first
all
20
the
minutes?
cards in a row.
I was like,
And I was
that's
like,
funny.
that's
Play
so
music.
sick. She's literally dropping 0
Which
words.
one?
Can I use it?
Yeah.
We're
These
trying
kids
that.
talking about fishing when I was talking about that, when they were made back in January. It's interesting.
Yeah, Zach likes fishing.
Heard a lot about fishing.
Yeah. I don't fish, but I was like, we can fish after.
Gotta motivate Zach to stay in rhythm.
Zach's really motivated. Zach's having a good old time.
Yeah.
Zach's just loving it.
Wait, can we take some more? This,
Yeah.
okay, that's 12 seconds.
Yep, 8:41.
I'm gonna send out an extra card during this week.
Oh, yeah, someone forgot you timed the other teams, or like the team's prep. That is so helpful, because,
I'm very meticulous about prep.
yeah, me too, but like,
It's been really tough in Kansas this year because none of the kids understand ceiling prep because of the online years.
Yeah.
So I ended up spending most of my time yelling.
yeah,
Sounds
it's like,
fun.
That sounds like something you do.
I'll like teach, try to like call kids for still like prep, but like doing it, I was like,
Oh my
man,
God.
just has such, it just
Oh
does
my
not.
God, some teams are so obvious, man. Jesus Christ.
Yes.
I have returned with a bountiful harvest.
Great. Oh, you're the best. Thank you.
Honestly, I forgot what everybody asked me to get, so I'm
Jeff.
just gonna fill my pockets.
You're a joke.
I'm gonna get your laptop, bro. I love you, Maureen.
Decent toss.
That's on the screen. Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
All right, I'm ready.
Cool. Case K. I separate the candidate from book. Nothing. Yeah. Anyone not ready?
Actually, you want
Oh.
to get my pen?
Yeah. Oh, and Brendan's gonna send out a card during the speech. That's going more rapidly, so. Okay, are y'all good? Great, I'm gonna start in 5 seconds. Now, consider foster observe your website solution covered with ideas from association for reader, Gilder, and Sand evidence. The plan for small wrinkles going forward is preferable and increases certainty less for economic growth and already might itself for military tech that so is extinction. Dropping case proves all of our arguments on framework because they can critique random parts of what I see without ever engaging the affixation is the same phenomenon requires prior consideration. Paragraph 16, not 16 is a qualitatively different phenomenon than some ethical categories, not only ring life and their histories and possibilities and solvable conditions of life, they imagine the union of plan of comprehensive negation, investigation, analysis, those organized reality, which is not a being, not being, about a life and death, once we're up for the intersections of race, being there, and not set up permanent there, permeable, include concepts of balance, only focus on human ignore the interaction with generalized conditions of reality, and people's life under subscribe that K, with the effort, purpose, competitive, you cost alternative, reduce problems, outline days, predictability, any or intervals, negative, monopoly, the object will focus, shift degrees, education proofs, intricacies, in-depth research, minimize effort, searching what I see, B, debates, and change subjectivities, we will media, family, maybe all that way, other rest stuff, the impact, see, consequences must be evaluated. Isaac 2, control of goodness, and a little more responsibility, that fails to see the intentions, not true, the achieve this hard to be a certain world, and the unclean conscience, subordinate politics, so much balance, and consequences, and the effects of action has been significantly clean. We're ask about the perceiving effects and perfect ways where else fluid is minorities political effectiveness. Still young or young and yourself evidence. Even if ontology is true, the fact that they read links and all proves that suffering and pain exists on a sliding scale should be avoided. No turns cases in the context of research distribution. We don't read climate or biology impact, so it doesn't apply to predict material incentives, explain contemporary anti-blackness, part of analogical things left to do more. As a theory reinforces the power of men and racial hierarchies, misfies it can't explain why it's just community caste system. Rari 15. Every hierarchy discusses the cultural origin of the hierarchies, all of the human imagination, barriers, and shared with the about loss and growth, and even the Hindu caste system being deeply embedded in Indian culture. People in India are totally influenced by caste and where vicious cycle perpetual racial hierarchy in America, Europe, Europeans, Jews, imports, from Africa, Africa was closer to the sheep and the races of all the world, so trained in the Middle East, Europe, rare as far as the West, and existing market in the American plantation, related with malaria, Africa, and the commercial genetic community, whereas Europeans have enjoyed circumstantial higher urban societies, like area members of the people, Europeans and Americans want to be seen as just versions harassing conservatives by this born Western culture separation maintained by racial legislation, so it's about them the result of suffering and cycle of custom divisions and became more intense to amplify those in south of the structure held by white cities, certainly the culturally rare theories like into obviously groups stronger than she's like the Jim Crow law, sections of circles go on back for a millennium, the Russian racial hierarchy, the spiritual chances are world princes, so evil hierarchies are nothing but the situation of a chance of more habits, one Judaism, this way history can only understand it by studying the circumstances of transport, big imagination to cool social constructs, and ontologies, the host, neurophysiological phobias, and values are malleable to gravitate and closure around institutional change. Solve crime, but level 15 would be easy to evidence of racism, urban and inevitable neuroscientists expect prejudice by system people that are research and coalition, the Trump race, Professor Republicans, writing rather than various volume of seems to trigger positive association, manipulate responded to the team, rather than physical response to that, remember change their testing, temporary the fellow individuals over hostility, and response to the flexibility, sharpness, reason, the opposite, cooperating, motion, increase, heavily reduce aggression, which is critical for neurologic system, and just as only collective evolution, which spaces in the sciences, the race, which reduce neurological customers, biology, and anti-blackness is analogical, historically contingent, able to change by the 13. Exclusion, inclusion, is the word in analogical studies, analytical fatalism, ideas, significant in the social line of the in black and white. This relation is a contingently conservative identities rather than unifixing whiteness, maybe deeply some meta. It does not hold the white of black being which is limited substance, whiteness, blackness, the same by condition, but socially, the anti which is struggle of all reactivation, political activities, and organized system, but what produces it. The word evidence, one, all of our answers, anti-blackness lies. Second, all answer queer pessimists of our interior, queer politics should be affirmative, optimistic, that probability during the better world, even to reject specific perspective features and otherwise embodying the death tries. 6. representatives insist on the absolute unequivocally elements whose oppositional status which are produced that by legal and not taking role seriously in the place of the death by the ego, or egregious militancy, and no future presented a party of pessimism, career optimism, or more sexual and no future is to the extent of practice either evidence and critical lectures by arguing for some reality from the promissory there was a resisting production logic or reproductive features of the other sides of money and just right indicates these is the wrong policies that set performance when people don't care about the environment and living communities is referencing for any political activity steps and logical violation gave in terms of the duty for reproducing reality that is not a simple practice of reproduction also the instrument of social change and takes a fundamental feature of society absolutely does is that reproduction is necessary to measure social or reproduction is opposite the empiricism of reproductive dictator to determine fully socialized institution practice of reproduction is fully recognized well as autonomy of these institutions and argues that no matter how seriously gain less humans are already child heterosexuality portrayed transformation civil society and everyday life through political reforms right does not or have more reactionary script by the types of exemplary articulated in the sense of respecting politically determined and theoretically displaying wrong the career evidence. One, the evidence says that white people generate futures or creates new categories, but they definitely don't solve it. Literally, any person wanting to continue their bloodline or have children be an instant feature making creates a double line. I think that every person in the US no longer feature makes, which means the alt death solves the length you vote on the perm, or they don't fiat anything, which means you can't solve any of their offense. Second is Pereira does not make an offensive claim that extinction creates out the other types of thinking. It means that we can focus on preventing extinction in short term and do their all the long term. Three, Carrera also doesn't make a defensive claim. It's setting Warren's homicide essay, which says that black queer people shouldn't have to focus on extinction. Is that not that extinction isn't real, that's something vast majority of people should care about. Four, Carrera advocates for the parents to screen false binary choices that actually so all their competition arguments on framework. It communicating risk is productive, that's productive, that's for solid four. I'm gonna finish doing it for the YC who work the rise effectiveness when then we're going for second to support against for types of tweet systems and vocalize and politics or public on debate against catastrophes publicly and risk begin by convincing official representative active and legally welfare side is institutionalizing all of you the fact that you cannot certainly does not apply and it has to try over for Christy or to visualize disaster self-living character of our side is the duty to prevent catastrophes for the present generations and catastrophic images promotes critical awareness for solve for this for these children is not replacing sea fostering public liberation while the potential catalyst and facing human activities addressing the next decade and unexpected consequences of failure to the present day chance that fostering disturbing oral imagination specifically critical question that the started provoke that is enemy expectedly about or question self-evidentness of existing or the Dylan like no timeline the app doesn't say the world is improving but that there doesn't say it's proof that it's not inherently anti-black arguments overly reducing accumulation of justice doesn't prove the history is how to prove material improvements prefer the specificity of Warren argument Harari's response here says that Judas violence is both decrease the time and some reason why things can improve in the future. The honest side will turn to the app and take the position of honest side. Feel can overcome spoke and overcome the alpha. Although so fails one, it doesn't solve the app classes for sure. The US is cheated norm shaping. The second homogeneity. The force of Black Americans one day, but resistance is marginalizing paternalistic one current solves three abstract movements will produce political results besides balance breaks out work back and forth 515. Traffic original alternative health care reality historical reckoning against failure chance to tell me see the balance track that so milk movements have trajectory not matter potentially rose will alternative people even violent and work with better alternatives and basic story abilities and literally difficult on my chooses better offering the LGBTQ nation evidence valid doesn't remediate this because LGBTQ nation is about long-term solutions like new housing or healthcare. Also this thing polar opposites because it's about future generations. We agree LGBTQ nation 21. Getting supportive mental health counseling, quality physical health care, living supportive environments and improve a person's life and also the lives of generations of all. And the China links one, they have to actually live in China's peaceful life seat out. Makes a comparative claim based on empirics. The US tech hedge is going to prevent a worse form of political control. Parts of things like Uyghur genocide or the fact that China is accumulating data of citizens makes a comparative claim that even if the US is on or that the US is net better than China in terms of shaping tech norms.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna read the card. Or I'll answer the IR link and then I'll read the card. One, they don't solve any of their IR bad claims because it doesn't scale up to do YALT doesn't scale up to do anything about them. If it does, it means that they definitely FIAT has a language you can vote on for a second. The argument or card doesn't make a trade-off argument. It doesn't say we're talking about IR prevents other things. We force them to specifically intend the app try to link. Only our method of preventing NIH violence while speaking as a CCP aggression effectively distinguishes between two issues and standardizes and homogenizing stereotypes. 121. Recent survey NIH violence Chinese government that is guilt and asserting any criticism of the Chinese government for responsibility for putting NIH and hatred commentators rightfully express where it has been conflict fan discrimination subject to you should have been tough and foreign policy but integrally defend against racism debate and China policy want to provide their dangers suggest you should form critical sense such as just review for conflict in Chinese state and people leaders and never produce dangerous falsehoods and Americans seem unable to distinguish between the Chinese government and Chinese people and other Asian groups to fight this. We have to mental homogenizing stereotype and reinforce a formally effective way to criticize. Mark Carter criticize. Brendan set that out, I believe. I'm good for cross-ex.
It's actually not a card.
Yeah, I sent it out at the beginning of this page. It was marked at criticize, like formulating an effective way to criticize.
Okay, cool. You good?
Yeah.
Great. I'm gonna ask on subpoint 4, the Carrera evidence. what does it look like for, this kind of refusal of the binary between extinction and non-extinction narratives?
Yeah, so the fourth subpoint is just Carrera is all about why it's bad.
Okay, so let's talk about that then. Like, where do you think that Carrera says those things? Like,
Sure, I can pull up the one in Z text. It's towards the bottom of the card. It's just like it's bad to force Black queer people into making decisions that are like false binary choices, or sort of forcing them to pick either between like.
how is the F not a false binary choice?
I don't know what you mean. The AF isn't because we think the alt is not mutually exclusive of the AF. Like, I don't know what you mean. The AF is
Okay,
a
but
false
then
binary
you've
choice.
proceeded to invoke extinction. So let's talk about how you reconcile those two things.
I'm sorry, I missed what you said.
And then you chose to evoke extinction. So I'm wondering how you reconcile those two things.
Yeah,
Because then Carrera,
okay,
for the
so
first
the-
90% of the card is like extinction has been narrative bad.
Yeah, so the first part of the card is not like, or it's more talking about when white people generate futures that's bad, which two things. It's talking about
disagree.
future generations, what the AF doesn't do. We haven't talked about future generations. We just think the extinction.
Okay,
of
so
people
let's
is bad.
talk about the
Second,
other
it's
reasons.
about when like individuals create like futures, like when like Greta Thunberg is like
I
need to like
disagree.
help our kids in the
Sure,
future,
whatever.
which is like something a ton of people do. So we think we all definitely can't solve that.
Okay, yeah, sure, we don't have to solve Greta, whatever. The Kurosawa evidence you've read, why does having, quote, a dystopian imaginary good for the...
Yeah, the second piece of Kurosawa evidence talks about how it jolts people out of complacency. It brings issues
Complacency
to
with
public
what?
complacency,
Like, what
just like
does
not
that stop
acting.
complacency with?
Um,
Or like, what does, communicating risk stop?
It
complacency?
communicates a risk that right now in the status quo, the Maui decision is overly vague. It says this is a problem that should be
So, like-
remediated. It brings it to people's attention, which the
So like, what
Kurosawa.
is he crossing through? Like, we don't really have to win about anything. So like, I'm wondering like,
Yeah,
what
this is
risk
sort
have
of.
you communicated to us that like the judges are like, hey, I know the Maui decision's bad, and now I'm just gonna solve all the hedge.
We think it's a distinct question. First, we
Really?
think under our framework, we don't have to win an external impact
Okay,
from our
but I'm
representations.
kind of asking about this card then.
I know, I'm just trying to explain it in the context of this is if we lose framework, we think there is still a net benefit to talking about extinction level risks. It's
Okay.
more just like a defense.
Okay, so how does it create that, quote, constructive engagement with the future?
Sorry, what do you say?
Your Kurosawa evidence says it creates, quote, constructive engagement with the future. I'm
Yeah,
asking,
again, the second piece of
what is
Kurosawa evidence and also in the first piece talk about how tying issue or like large existential threats in the status quo
Yes,
with
but, like,
proposals
how?
on how to remediate them is
like,
good.
so like Tim just starts like going out and says Maui decision bad to everyone?
We think it's not that you now dedicate your entire life to trying to correct the Maui decision. It's just something people are aware of, which increases. If you're right, the debate is able to shape our subjectivities, which like we don't agree with. But if you're right about
Okay,
that,
so but
then
it's an
leads
even if claim that if we suddenly hear about a policy, we somehow become receptive to that. Doesn't
you
mean-
become more aware of it than you would have previously been.
And then go.
You also don't think there's a
10. I was just gonna say eight, but sure, yeah. I'll take it.
The order's gonna be kiss. I'll sign this will be done in 1 hour if I go through it, but I'm gonna go straight down most of them.
Is it cool if I go to the bathroom quickly?
Do you what now?
Go to the bathroom quickly before.
Does anyone have a timer I could borrow, Richard?
Yeah, just Brennan also forgot his, so this is one of MBA's like extra timers.
Oh,
It doesn't
yeah.
have the standard part.
Jesus. Yeah,
Sorry, that's like all we have, genuinely.
that's fine.
Who do y'all meet after this?
Lawrence Free State.
Yeah.
Oh, nice. Y'all after then? Yeah, we were just neck against them last round.
Fun. I love fucking this arena.
Should you do when road four ends?
Like when it ends?
Yeah.
Let me see when round.
All I know is that
Should end around
Thanks.
6. 5:45 or 6, because round 4 starts at 4.
Yeah, so it'll just be 6 hours.
Yeah.
That's pretty early.
That's pretty good. For the case stuff, is it gonna be like an overview and then framework or like what?
Overview, framework, Lando.
Well, you're acting like you're on a panel.
Just clarify.
Very good about that. Remember Ezra.
That's unfortunate.
It's fine. Anybody not ready? Of course.
You're decent that timer. I was like, you have 3 minutes timer.
Cool, I'll start in the next 5 seconds and then we'll stop.
Wait, sorry, there are no cards you said?
Yeah.
The only question to debate is whether the one who sees participated in a process of on-site is a condition of non-being in a ratio that companies exist as black queerness. Black queer bodies have no grim or suffering or open to overkill because the bonds that happens in them cannot be theorized by humanist notions of bonds or ontological frameworks because both ontology and humanism fail to understand how the commodity that is black queerness is cut in multiple different ways through both anti-queerness and anti-blackness. This can be seen in the case of Steve Frederick, whose body was dismembered and put in a blue plastic tube with the gay N-word number 1 in order to represent a continual repetition of bonds that continues a condition of oxide due to the differential horizons of human and ontological bonds that is happens as the black queer bodies. If we win the one fails to resolve anti-queer bonds, it produces bonds materially. You should vote negative because it means the affirmative can never deliver care for black queer people. Framework proper counter-interpretation of the role of the balance between intellectual striving for black queer and situating the one in relation to queer bodies, even if it doesn't change everyone's mind, reframes debate through ontological analysis, which is key to any form of health for black queer bodies. Reasons to prefer first is black queer participation. The lack of identifiable black transformators are indicative of a version of anti-blackness and gender antagonism in debate. Only the model specific to recognition and antagonism itself and the needs of black trans people can facilitate or organization that doesn't start from trans alienation, largest impact to academic spaces as it internalizes trans antagonism. That's the queer the LGBTQ nation card. Second is place making this out. The 186 research paradigm is guilty of superficial inclusion of blackness that believes the line between constituting of black materiality. Continued discussions of space sutured by uneven colonial racial geographies and the natures of the black placelessness and servitude, physically alienating black people in politics about theirs and their kin's body. Fairness proper first is forming fairness as intrinsic goodness. The slave master's moves towards innocence allows for the judge to fulfill their desire by making the game fair as a prerequisite to discussions upholding debate as a white fantasy space. Second, you should be willing to break debate for black queer people. Discussions of black queerness are made inherently unpredictable by the logic of overkill means that any discussion of the life will be made unfair and eliminate them. The subjectivity offense. I will answer it here. Almost no one here is here to become a policymaker. They're not my grammar. Policy debate is so broken that we don't make judgments over issues that we debate, which externalizes to people like Neil Cotillon and Karl Rove defending child slavery. Our model provides subject-oriented classrooms, refines individuals who, despite the outside influences proven by things like people like Jarius Grove, Marquis Ard, and consciously. Second is when they say to prioritize competition or debate just a game. You can't prioritize a game over ethics. The implication of the argument is that debate justifies gratuitous violence, which is antithetical to any benefit of the game. Winning a linked argument justifies a procedural violation tied to anti-blackness. Third is even if not, you shouldn't vote for racist shit. They literally cited us the way in which they conceptualize their politics to the association with China, which Joe will do a little bit more work on. But the end point is internalization of the changeable practices proven by textual edits for ableism, or how there's no textual difference between saying the N-word and having a racist practice in debate proper. The fiat stuff. First, the math and pedagogical reality serves as the vehicle to dominate black non-being debate is undergirded by will to save the majority through the use of black man in white man's hands. The proven by the evoking black death is a byproduct of extinction, including problems of anti-black research practices, which makes the imagination synonymous with destruction, which internally exhausting for black people. Second, our model accesses the benefit of fiat better. Even cite an example where fiat ever created debaters who hold the political accountable. The input of their politics are Karl Rove and Neil Cotillon, but prioritizing orientation to each other creates organizations like the Leader. They have a beautiful struggle with K debaters from Towson that move towards ethical policies like legalization of marijuana. And CGR third is called towards pragmatism. Flip on them. Policy debate doesn't teach us how to implement policies, but it can define the beliefs that are willing to change, which means that you should prioritize social criticism and guide policy education. The last part will be now framework will be answered by Joe. The ontology claim, we're not making an ontological claim. It's a distinction between the way in which ontological cutting and humanism cut black harness in a differential manner. Tim Ellis, don't fuck me up here, because I've made a specific argument about the way that black harness exists within the world that is separate from anti-blackness. You have to have a very high threshold for how the liminal struggle black people is specific to the way in which the gender and the antagonism that it accompanies black harness through standing for is uniquely understood. The Aurora evidence is garbage. It associates anti-blackness with the Hindu caste system. I don't know how this is equivalent, nor the way in which it functions properly. You should look at the Aurora evidence for a second, associated with the pathologization of the very violence that we've necessitated true, and necessitates a gruesome analogy that we've impact turned insofar as it says that the sort of contingent forms of violence can always be associated within conflict when we establish antagonism as a prior level question. The ontology is a hoax stuff. We had the Sakara and Babel evidence. The Sakara and Babel evidence literally says the political formations determine our relationship to race. Obviously, Democrats don't have a differential relationship to Obama when they call him the N-word, but we've also made a prior level critique about how racism overcoats that very practice and how gender initiates that same sort of process. Writ large, the Sakara and Babel evidence also makes another problematic claim that playing on a mixed race softball team can somehow swallow. I'm sure Colin Kaepernick can say a lot about that. The Hudson evidence, anti-blackness can change, not sufficient because the Hudson evidence is in reference to political formations without understanding that the black bar cannot be understood within the political in the first place. As proven in the Stream Frederick example, when the police couldn't even identify who had died in the first place. It was like the work of queer activists that identified that Steen was the one who was murdered. The Warren evidence stuff, all the anti-blackness arguments apply. I don't know how they apply. You should make them clarified. Even if that's the case, the 1 year is way too late. You should not give it to them. Second, the queer politics stuff. This Snyder card is literally just saying queer optimism good. I don't know how this is an argument for the affirmative, nor how they've initiated the very process of queer optimism. But we've said that queer pessimism creates the grounds for queer optimism in the first place. We can create a bridge, which will be done by the 1 R and show the Bellman evidence about the case thesis being wrong because of political side of reform. You can cross-apply the answer to the Hudson evidence. It's essentially the same card. The Carrera stuff will be done by Joe. The next few cards about extinction also be done by Joe. The representation stuff was answered on framework writ large, but it says it shapes people's perceptions of language itself, which means that they produce pathology, which we've in fact turned at the level, even if it's not a material consequence, pathology is enough to initiate an intellect thought process that we've said is necessarily bad boys. For instance, the white geoengineering link, the one he sees upholding of REM and socio-engineering determines what matters for the unification of bodies. The geological purification of blackness is continued tradition that starts from the first shipment of slaves in Portugal for mining lines. And the one you see like U.S. reemergence of nuclear in the rare earth mineral supply chain under Biden efforts renewed with massive investments and hardline on China. And the one you see Subin evidence maintains extractive economies of geography that disfigures the inhuman geographies as dead and dying and anti-intellectual. Don't let the ass purpose be spun in the one area. It's not a means to help black people or retooling the status quo categories of human to make the balance of colonial periphery more subversive. Your framing of human extinction is a wounded attachment to self-preservation, emblematic of the social race riots. Really proper rights were burned down Black Wall Street after taking their money. The impact of spiritual murder, the division of groups that validate extermination, disposition of black bodies for a better future under other geographies. That's the USOF evidence. You should isolate what they've said in response to the USOF evidence. And the USOF evidence, it's not specific at all or in reference to social geography. So you should weigh it as a conceded linked argument with an external impact, which means it's just a question of framework. Coercive governance, like the U.S. modeling, perfects the sovereign master colonizing periphery to establish zones of future loss, which evacuates black life from the body. The one is the accidental card is amazing, establishing that sovereign nations use the securing of the civil spaces, in this case, preventing global threats like the growth, which means expanding Western universalism to subversively bolster the perception. They have zero ink on this card, which means that the bright line for this card is at the bottom. The app is no different from when Europeans initialized the establishing of relationships with Africa for trade that makes space for a couple years. Europe being allying around the scramble for Africa to colonize African land in their own interest. The impact is on society, domestic destruction of the very being of black existence on the paradigm of U.S. reconstruction that functions to bolster U.S. confidence. Remember, the only answer here was that you have to fiat it under the alternative. We're not making an argument about the alternative solos, but rather it's externalized the way in which they've created those geographies in the first place, and the alternative can contend with the existence of the people who are killed on those geographies. The trade-off argument, there's no reason why we have to make a trade-off argument, especially when we've said that your IR paradigm is one that creates those zones of indifference, which means at best we've already established the link. So you have to do the work to separate yourself from it. The Dylan evidence and it'll be done in the one or the Warren and the cross-application stuff dumb, because then the Harari extension is already insufficient as proven above. The permutation will be done in the one or the alternative fails argument doesn't solve the app. We don't have to solve the app. We set a differential threshold to understanding the black queer body. The second homogeneity design. There's no reason why black people understanding black queer bodies is necessarily bad.
It's not pathologizing. It's saying you shouldn't be fucked up.
Oh, wait.
Did you see the nation? I'm going to do this.
Ah, 7:37.
Okay, are you good?
Uh-huh.
Cool. Okay, the app creates zones of indifference. I just want to make sure I understand the thesis of the link. What specific actions do the app do that creates those zones?
Right. We said that the extension of the Maui paradigm is one that necessitates the stratification of certain established zones. We've said that occurs.
Why does it create the specification of exactly?
We have the stuff. We're basically impact turning the group impact.
Yeah.
It's pretty clear.
Okay, wait, sorry. Impact
Like,
rate.
The impact to the one you see was growth that creates competition between great power nation states, which that potentially affects.
Yes.
Okay. So competition between great power nation states is bad?
Yeah, because it creates those zones.
Because it creates zones of indifference.
Okay, what does the alternative look like if those states aren't at competition?
We don't have to solve it. We've set a differential threshold for understanding the core bodies of the higher level questions.
Okay,
we can't create solutions for other people without understanding how core bodies are positioned in a way that necessitates them being the gasoline for those solution making in the process.
Okay, so to be clear, the threshold for voting negative is like a tiny risk, or not tiny, but like a risk of a link.
Any risk of a link is
Any risk of a link, and you don't have to solve the risk.
No.
Okay, cool.
But you've already been racist in this round, so if we win that sufficiently, that should be good.
Okay, cool. Do you have to win anything happens outside of the round? Not alt, sorry, your framework interp, because I get the alt is like the, but do you have to win anything happens after the round ends, or can you win purely based off it?
We will make an argument about the threshold of our model as one that says that the possibility of the model is there. I gave examples like the leaders of a beautiful black struggle for the reason why the net benefit of our model is one that initializes ethical practices.
Okay, so you don't have to come up with like the exact model. The app or Ned just like gets the ball rolling on coming up with maybe a possible alternative framework.
I have no idea what you just asked.
Sorry. To be clear, the alternative form of debate that the neg is proposing is just suggestions of other examples of alternative methods of framework?
No. The counter-interpretation is the ballot's choice between intellectual models for quorness.
Okay,
So
and
it's a framing around the black bar, because we said that the black bar exists in non-B.
okay, and what threshold does the AF have to meet to win under that inter?
You have to just win that you don't participate in the process alongside.
Okay, we have to win that, so we have to win 0 risk of a link to the AF.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So the framework is anything above 0% risk of a link means you vote negative. That makes sense. What is the offensive reason why talking about extinction is bad?
Yeah, that'd be in the 1 bar. I didn't do the extinction here.
Oh, I know, I was just curious based off the 1 and C. It didn't seem like there was an offensive reason.
It didn't. There was like 4 or 5 cards.
What were they?
The Carrera evidence.
Yeah, what's the
Warren
offensive
evidence.
argument Carrera makes?
What?
What is the offensive argument Carrera makes?
It was explained in the 1 and C. Do you want me to do it again?
Yes, I
Before
do.
North stands up and does the same thing. Cool. Still do it.
Cool.
Sorry, I went off.
Well, it's case, the first thing I'll do, I'll just do the 2 AC stuff first. So like the advantage that they like separated from the K, and then, let's see, order.
Are your cards?
Yeah. one second. Yeah, let me just sum up first, and then I'll be more specific. I need to close the box, it's not loading at all. There. Now it's good. Okay. Let's do the order stuff. So the advantage thing that I talked about, the perm, the extinction stuff. So like, I'll also answer the like Rex cards, and then the like CCP versus Chinese people.
It's like Isaac.
Yeah.
Isaac. the
Yeah,
card.
to be clear, the card that they wrote out consequentialism, I will also answer at the extinction stuff. Let's go. Great, real good?
I haven't gotten the cards yet.
Okay, just let me know.
Okay, I have them now, thanks.
Okay. Yep. Okay, perfect. Nobody in 2022 is doing a good job debating the case, even when we read all of our cards on it, drop the gut check. They do not solve the tech leadership impact. Jane is independently about AI of human use. Any AI should be sufficient to cause it. This is relevant for the extinction debate. It's inevitable, which obviates the case outweighs 2 AR, and it also bolsters the link to our China stuff because it proves that it's inevitable and fake. The perm, 1, every link is scholarship to set that the perms and solvency. 2, mutually exclusive. 1 and 2 more. Sex solidarity available to those within the illicit economy that cause sex workers. Amalgamation with the form denies access, and which fortifies formal sexual economies of benevolence, which cause their social death. 3rd, conditional promises that perms with victim promises to cardinal that maintain structural killability, but continue the destruction of Cruz faces after the Stonewall riots. Cruz inevitable failure of any solution cause racial battle taking career revolutionaries. 4th is that the perm is a new link. The concept after articulations without commitment to actually change anti-harness. Liberal temporality that adds and stirs harness after they've been called out for it, which acts radical but actually turns out a lot blind eye to violence. 5, sequencing focus on the racialized pure body through intimacy, gender, social energy necessary to engage institutions without it. They've been experiencing psychic burnout, which means the ult is a prerequisite to the perm double line. It's a false choice because the ult solves its care limit, requires social life beyond the master stipulation, but residual links being used to it, right? Because the next equation framework says if there's culture consistent with anti-career proceeds, you can't endorse it even if the ult's not strong enough to overhaul all overkill, and we are not said that we feel out everyone's mind. The extinction stuff, 1, overkill, the 1 years too late with the juice
is equal because he's in the absolute and extinction with utopia can be content with the intimate violence done to the core body once he war describes it. Materialization as an overkill, mutilation of the violence of death and career. Like people with color creates a grammar of ethics being intelligible utility exists our reason outside of reason maintains society itself. Third, second is that temporality. You want to see Dylan exposes that generating like is built into the rest of the paradigms that does not undo the past, but puts it into the present like reasons, protest, response, etc., which causes career mutilation within the horror of sex reproduction. Third, anti-routine dissent, their model for future the invention of a future people solution to human ecological life, which is not forgetting of the making of another non-human people by slavery, which means black death unprovable. For black life, like this is always a fourth scale, like back of black others who jumped off the ships and they showed didn't have to be one of the slavery. The affirmation of life as intrinsic is insufficient to understand how extinction is existent with black subject, but also the metaphysics exceeds utility, which means their ethics relies on metaphysical structure and is messed up because the existence of slavery fucks up ethics, since you know it's bad, but you would not rely on any cost-benefit framework to it, because then you would justify the 99 over the 1. That's rare evidence. So for I'll answer the line that they differ here. First, the first double line doesn't make any sense to be here. Away every single mindset. We just said that the representations of that in the status quo is bad. Their evidence is not. They're not read our evidence specific enough to say that no, refusing binaries is enough for justification for permutation. The substance of the permutation was answered above, so most of it is irrelevant. And it does say that extinction as a grammar is bad. So the trade-off stuff makes zero sense. The fourth living laboratory just have the one different determination of flesh being spirit, sociality, and psychology being the body, i.e. biological being in this endless cycle of political simulations, necessity blacks in such a fungible equipment to project for human values and desires. That's the one to more evidence. The murder operation sustains business as usual, which justifies spirit murder with existential threat, which outweighs because it evacuates the spirit from the body, which kills body to life. 5 times 70 distance. They're called an endless distance or from death to both impossible mythologies, black existence via catastrophe, which impact terms their evidence. From Burl, the 16, we leave false with death is always with death divides life itself. Death remains of life work. Within this haunting principle characterized by black and sandal's property, that's its life and top bar, ethically to be redeemed is within death, the nature of this as for it's impossible the unchangeliness of death, seduces possibility, ethical obligation, thinking, live in excellent endless proximity, death becomes impossible to be living becomes a kind of bearing witness to impossibility, market, and impossibility. The stuff they write about consequences, their evidence just says that if we would be politically irresponsible to not do so, we have impact our political responsibility, and context proves that they do not create that political responsibility in the first place, so it's relevant. But even then, vote negative to recognize the consequences of them introducing racist shit into debate, which is independently better than racist. The consequences of the plan because it does not actually solve any of the stuff. The representations often being read in the treatise is not offense for them. Their evidence is bad and does not say anything about how speech acts and debate can actualize that rhetoric. But if you win that, then it's sufficient to vote negative because we have won that their rhetoric is intrinsically bad regardless because we have evidence why theirs is uniquely bad. The China turn as a community activity, debate must be held accountable for implicit and asymmetrical rhetorical protocols that maintain Orientalism to predetermine what conversations are valuable. They must explain what China virus made my mom called the Georgia Chinese for the first time during quarantine. Intervening at the level of debate is important to correct baited by its only art as speech act specific. Roche 20, rising 18 racism around the world, previous representations of Asian sustainable commentator synthesis of suffering of the affected people have been suggesting they deserve to be needed to understand the market context of Western policy in the way it produced the hostile difference to appreciate the variety reaction of some first academics and others not player some dismiss these significance of the bottom of some play, choosing to analyze and previous analyze using others claim denunciation of xenophobia or value level only if they denounce the harms of the Chinese state concentration against weaken political claims implicit agreeing on denials and implicit denials and minimizes the psychological political implications that conventionally follow racism and structural downplaying racism helps or racist market at racist. This is proven by the treaty. They've just said we have to disprove that China is bad. Our evidence is about technological surveillance. It says specifically that does not happen on the same level. And the U.S. has the same stuff with the CIA, which is a literal false equivalency saying that they are causally worse causes those things. White liberal intentions for separating China, Chinese people are bad, but anti-China discourse actually causes racist. Nationalist mindset, TKOs, the treaty hung evidence, and 20, the new China surface video, we're counting the third child war against China, maybe a way for refined deficiencies against African American, paranoia, and come to the mindset, cultural fears of the other has seems to be a force of social political indoctrination. Indoctrination.
841.
841.
Yeah.
You're gonna start that now. I'm proud. I have 440 left.
437.
Prep police.
I don't believe they're in price.
Is there cards and are you gonna get straight down?
I don't think there are cards. The order will be in the order.
2
Two ways. At least for the most part. So like I'll try to signpost. Some of the 1NR stuff will be before some of the stuff that was at the bottom of the 2NC. Okay, cool. Is everyone good?
Ambiguity in the functional equivalence test causes mass regulatory uncertainty that crushes the industry and the economy. Independently, REM mining collapses tax leadership and greatly suppressive use of technology by China. All companies in extinction. They don't. The argument about us not solving tech leadership is wrong and doesn't assert that it is responsive to any of the warrants in Jane about why the regulation, the regulation norms set by U.S. leadership can check worse use of AI, which means that we check the impact, which means that we still solve it, which takes out all their extinction inevitable stuff. The extinction outweighs its irreversible causes extreme suffering and precludes opportunities for improvement and forms all frame of being. Even if we don't access extinction, all of our impacts are still categorically undesirable, which means that we still outweigh. That's all the Burke evidence. All their often hears about why prioritizing future generations is bad. That's not why we think that extinction is bad. The fact that extinction does prevent reproduction doesn't mean that it's the reason that we think extinction should come first. They link to that too, though, which is proven by the LGBTQ nation we highlighted, which was conceded. If the all can't solve any of this, then it's not a reason that the app is bad. That the app is bad. The word evidence is in response against weighing extinction onside. It doesn't say that extinction isn't real, nor does it say that the vast majority of people shouldn't care about it at all. It argues is that forcing black queer people to prioritize extinction is bad. We don't do that, and the perp definitely solves it, which answers overkill and Anthropocene. The idea is the time stuff isn't an offensive reason why preventing extinction is bad. The career evidence is answered by the stuff that I did above. The Kurosawa evidence answers the political simulation DA, which I'll do later. The proximity DA was answered above. There's no, and the card was marked super early. There's no link though, because we don't distance ourselves from death, which will be on the Kurosawa card. Use consequences of way the offer of purpose competitive opportunity cost alternative preferred key to fairness and clash or intervention of aimfully regressive version of markets for teams to artificially generate competition for every floating base case single one to the one you see feet away. Any structure remotely related to the affiliate rates and more capitalism makes being half impossible in text fairness, which is with an impact filter and an intrinsic good that matters because the internal link to all of our offense was conceded, which means that if we went any aggressive an impact, then you default half on frame. The overall instructions voted for whoever did the better debating anything else is super arbitrary. The participation arguments are wrong from in the linchpin of participation, and theirs doesn't solve broader issues in the debate space. When the AFA doesn't exclude people from the debate community, but the participation argument is infinitely regressive anyways, and fairness precedes it. People need a reason to want to participate in order to do so. We're not policing, we just think that there should be some threshold for engagement with the AFA. Some arguments like new to our arguments are inevitably excluded for fairness purposes. Content of the arguments are irrelevant. Our framework doesn't take a certain type of content of argument, but a threshold for what type of argument is sufficient to vote. Nag on fairness is good. They buy into it with speech times, not clipping, etc. There's no reason why it's uniquely why you lose is a terrible model. If we actually did something racist, then you would have stopped around and gone to tab. Inflating what you see with microaggressions turns our offense, and we have defense of the CCP stuff. The distinction between procedure and content does matter, which takes out their offense. First, they don't solve any of their offense ability, all cause like family, friends, and reading in school. Second is that the link is backwards and competitive nature of debate. Every antagonist of non-agreement will just rewrite Black's answers their pathology argument. Third is that if the right class of specifically in the case of the alternative FC and persuasion is the only way to create successful communities successfully, like half the old dead buy-in. The links of fiat is good for every normative statement is fiat, including the old second there's value in the narrative. The one you see communication of high magnitude risk is desirable so long as we simultaneously propose solutions to those things. That's across all weapons. Dystopian stereo analysis opens up potentialities for new policy paradigms in the future. People bias towards avoiding competition with the existence of threats, but representations of nuclear apocalypse can motivate action. The China stuff they're capable of criticizing China replicates the CCP propaganda. They complaints of criticizing the CCP with broader anti-Asian racism. That's the hung evidence that reinforcing patronites and stereotypes and tingles two entirely distinct subjects. It's analogous to saying that we can't criticize Israel because doing so is anti-Semitic. The Dowd evidence articulates a variety of ways in which the CCP and other autocratic entities are and how they utilize tech is demonstrably worse than how the U.S. does and how the norms about the U.S. are better. You haven't read a card saying that that's not true. The Roche evidence is about COVID. We all agree that the rhetoric's blaming China for that is bad, but we're right in the context of tech. Those two things are distinct. The Lillich evidence was marked early and doesn't make a new word, which means that the above stuff applies. The ontology stuff, Sakar and Van Bevel are responsive set to new neurological studies that determine that people associated more with groups in race, sexuality, or gender, and then found that those groups were malleable. Proves that career path is wrong because the political structure of the United States is malleable, not overcoded by race and gender. Prefer that anecdote. The 1 year isn't too late. Second card we run into AC and the transition. There's no excitement for colonialism link. The stupid evidence about domestic protecting no coercive government link. The app doesn't increase competition, but says that increasing interconnectedness is good. And there's no China link. I did that above.
737.
what was the first thing you said on fiat? I didn't quite catch it. Like the first subpoint.
Oh, the first subpoint was just like all normative statements are fiat.
Okay.
Try that. We're gonna have to look at the live stream and see where I placed it down. Honestly, whatever you decide.
Cool. The order is gonna be straight up. And by straight down, I mean 1 hour straight down, except for the part where they answer the theory, which I'll elevate to the top. Everything else should be conducive.
Where did the other camera go?
Oh, they got it. 'Cause they didn't answer.
Good? Cool. I'll start in the next 5 seconds if no one stops.
The only question to debate is whether the one is participated in process of onticide if not said onticide once in the 1 hour, which means should be at the reframing threshold for the way in which you evaluate this round. The only answer that comes even closest to Zakar and Bebo evidence, which has 2 specific insights that get straight drop first, is the association with political parties is definitely not true through the Obama example, how Democrats can still call Obama the N-word, or the sort of ability to reparate the racial formations by joining mixed race softball teams proven by Colin Kaepernick also proves the way in which this is not a malleable resource, but then the way in which black porn is uniquely constructed is one that is double negation that should be prioritized within your ethics. This means any paradigm evaluation should elevate it to such framework. Counter-interpretation of the role of the ballot is a choice between intellectual strategies for black porn, as they have not sufficiently answered the black porn participation argument. It's not an exclusion argument, but rather a burnout argument about how black porn participation is already on the low right now. I associate through the lack of identifiable black translators, but rather their model is one that necessitates a misrecognition of their needs, which facilitates the lack of organizing thing which internalizes trans alienation within debate. It's not an argument about how they get externally excluded, but how the monikers of debate become a question of excluding them in the first place. This is the logic impacting the academic spaces insofar as it has an external health impact that will levy against it for fairness stuff. I already answered the exclusion stuff, the fairness proceeds argument. No, we proceed because there's no reason why a fair model is necessary without a black bar people within our calculus. It's not a policing argument. It's not a policing argument. We made a burnout argument. They said if we do something racist, then you won't stop the round anyway. This should be a framing mechanism, which means that even if we lose framework, you can stop the round immediately if we prove a link because it proves a sufficient link to racism within this round independently. The subjectivity stuff, actually fairness stuff, they drop that you should be willing to debate you should be willing to break debate for black poor people because discussions of black partners are inherently unpredictable and not fair in the first place, which means that you should elude it. So any sort of insinuation of fairness to the inclusion of black poorness, the sort of the threshold for subjectivity. I'll do it here, the subjectivity argument. They've dropped key formations of it, i.e. not everyone's here to become a policymaker, but rather the dominant group of debate creates Neil Cotiols and Karl Rose. Rather, we've said that an ethical subject-oriented clash is one that is better. We're providing examples, while they have no counterexamples, like consciously curious growth, which means that our model was best. The fiat stuff is the last thing I'll do on framework. They've determinedly mishandled it because they've dropped the impact turn of fiat itself, i.e. the absent methodological pathological reality that results in the use of black people to necessitate their imaginary. This is proven by the anti-black research practices that make it possible, i.e. their ability to say linchpin in the middle of their framework speech, which means that the way in fiat is constructed is one that always elucidates anti-black suffering. But second, they've dropped that our model accesses and is able to access fiat's representations better because it says it's through examples like the leaders of beautiful struggle, K debaters in Towson, that we can access that false nuance that they say is necessarily good. Please. I'm going for the white geoengineering link because it goes criminally mishandled. It's or the causal link about their independent investment in geoengineering, i.e. the ability to uphold REM is one that necessitates the thingification of bodies. It creates zones of indifference and destruction on the basis that black people are no longer represented as bodies, but rather ones that are objective value in and of itself. The impact is the spiritual murder, the division of group that validated their extermination in the first place, which becomes a prior level question because even if we don't win forever, we just have to win a link and the impact framing arguments sufficiently. I'll do the extinction here. The Jewish cold conceded that they don't get tech leadership. In fact, that one area tries new warrants about norms, but it's too late. Strike it off your flow. I'll insert this re-highlighting proves that AI could be rogue enough to cause extinction. Causes the rest of the cars talks about norms that have no warrants for why it solved existential AI when even marginally worse than surveillance. This means that they don't get extinction at waste because it's inevitable and any link is sufficient about negative since they were in the plant. Also, bolsters uniqueness for our links proves that it's not a tiebreaker between different forms of energy and tech leadership. Not good for the China stuff because they've conceded that China has just as much surveillance as the US. They've answered it with warrants about other areas too. The extinction can't hear any dissent is an independent link argument. The one area has only one reason why extinction narratives are good, which is it motivates action. They have no reason why they're not in future generations, which we're not going for anyway. I'll answer the one more here. They don't motivate action. Debates can't teach people to increase hegemony, but it can change activities on the margin. That was the framework debate. Their explanations have no warrant for why extinction in this round will make anyone want to do anything. They've dropped our other two dissents, the proximity to decide, i.e. the Marullo evidence that isolates the proximity to death means that it's not a question of what we can do in the future because death is lingering now, but it's the ability for our ethical obligation to dwell within that abyss and necessitate the ability to sacrifice ourselves for a better future in the first place. Second is a living laboratory argument. There's both a framework design and an impact term of using biological life as an object for debate rounds because it necessitates blackness as a fungible equipment that protects human values, desires. The murderous operations of flesh obliteration sustains business as usual, justifying spirit murder with existential risk. This A makes black people devoid of care and value, justifying cycles of violence like Flint and Jackson, but B culminates outside a destruction of all relational life that exceeds calculation.
I'll send out that. I forgot this one.
437, you said? Sure.
Okay, I sent it out.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, understand. Thanks. Just like K/the K, just like in the same order, the 2 and C. Okay. Is anyone not ready? Cool. Little Rock has created a model of debate that is literally impossible for us to negate. They've said the only question of debate is whether the 1AC mentions on the side, but there's no way for us to predict that that should be the stasis point of debate, and they don't have an argument for why that should have been predictable. The fact that they have not contested the actual content of like alpha once in this debate proves all of our offense, because it proves that they should just critique small portions of the 1AC, things like words our authors use or things our authors have said in other instances, and then use those as a reason to reject the team, which makes debate terminally impossible for the affirmative. The terminal impact of that is fairness, which I'm going to do later on the flow of the fairness debate. But even then, they have not, or they've extended defense to the tech impact, but not the Allison Hedge impact. That's a campaign internal link which says that the U.S. has to grow strong right now in order to maintain hegemony, which is a good thing. They do not have any sort of implications on why that would be a bad thing, which means you give it to us. I'll do extinction debate first because it's really important. Extinction comes first. 3 different ways the case debate outweighs. One is that winning structuralism/ontology debate, which I'll do slightly later on the flow. Second is that extinction would be bad even if black people, queer people are socially dead. The GC Berg evidence says that nuclear extinction precludes things from ever getting better and ends the conditions for any life on Earth. Means both people who are socially dead will lose all current sources of joy. But also the 7 billion people K would apply to also die. Preferring anything other than util is arbitrary because preferring certain lives over others is bad. Third is that nuclear war massively increases suffering, obviously for the fact that they read impacts and debate arguments that the alt solves links. They believe trying to remediate suffering is good. We access more of it because nuclear war would massively make life terrible for everyone. Things like radiation would exist, which would make life painful for people who didn't die the second bomb's impact, which means that the after nuclear war is a good thing. That they haven't really contested the Sakara wrong. And I'll answer the 2 words here. The Sakara evidence is really good. It's a neurological study that found that people who looked at people within their in-group, when they looked at people within their in-group, the part of the brain that activates when you see things you fear, the amygdala did not activate, which proved that they didn't fear those people. Then when they had switched the groups around and had people talk to their new groupmates, they found that they then didn't trigger the amygdala when they were talking to their new groupmates. And it said not only did preferences like or not only group biases trump things like race and gender, but those structures are malleable and thus able to change. The 2 examples they cite in the 2 and are wrong. The first is that Dems are racist, but Obama authoritarianism responsive because he didn't actually deliberate in the way the Sakara evidence says, and talks about how personal connection is able to overcome those biases. The second is the softball thing, but it's a metaphor. Even then, they drop in 1AR framing that specific anecdotes should not be preferred. Instead, you should prove neurological studies about the way the brain works. They said that both are dropped. No, they were answered. And they also dropped that 1AR analysis I did about the framework to be proper. Our interpretations that use consequentialism with your after gets competitive opportunity cost alternative. There is no alt extended into the 2 and R refutation of consequences and material desirability of the plan. Meaning, if we win framework, we win the round. All of the app internal link work is gone. Conceded. The model incentivizes a race to the bottom, but if you link, you lose K's. Word picks links to unhighlighted or lines or random things our authors have said, etc. Strategically disincentivizes engaging with the app and Rex plan stasis and debate. Dex fairness to break down the activity. Fairness is an impact filter and intrinsic good, since the reasons to make it theoretically be beneficial have to be filtered through whether debate are fair enough to provide an incentive for participation. Obviously, for the fact they think it's good to have more black trans people in debate means that they think debate can be a site for good change. But if people are having unfair debates that they know they're going to lose the center they enter into them, they're not going to debate, period, which turns all of their offense. Let me debate a prerequisite to their participation offense, which I did above. That means any risk of defense is a reason breaking down debate is bad. Our model doesn't uniquely cause burnout. There's 0 more than 2 and R for providing an alternative for weighing. The app is uniquely causing black queer people participation in debates or any activity to decrease. Our framework just says that you should engage the app. It's not any content-based policing. Any risk our offense is true is taken out by the conceded antagonism turn. If you vote Ned, we won't suddenly change their subjectivities. We'll just make teams rewrite blocks become even more antagonistic. take that one conceded. In terms of social movement within a competitive space like debate, it means that people aren't being like, wow, they're so right about their framework. They're just like, wow, I totally got judge fucked in that round. The Karl Rove stuff is irrelevant. We all come to debate with preconceived notions of the world with school, family, reading, etc. One round is irrelevant. Karl Rove and me, how do you all come into debate with racist views? And those views were created by debate or by our framework because there are a million different things that outweigh. They're talking about debate writ large, but a single round does not create or significantly change their subjectivities. It's done by the thousands of other rounds they had against absolute defending hedge, and we had defending hedge against K's. The argument that K turns fairness, no, through structural fairness precedes procedural fairness, because if they're right for the fact that debate exists in antagonism to Black queer people, then judges are just going to use the lack of structural fairness as a reason to be arbitrarily unfair to potential debaters. The argument that if the RAF is racist, you stop the round. Yeah, we agree with the fact that you didn't prove that there is a difference between the examples that the 2NR is citing and the links to the app. The links proper, I'll respond to them both here. The first REM link about zones of difference rendering Black bodies out of value. You know that the articulation that 2NR was that the student evidence is about extractive colonialism, but the student evidence is about domestic production. The next link about the Ready didn't extend the other link, the no tech leadership stuff. I'm not going for it. We extend the Allison/Kempe evidence, but the extinction inevitable argument is wrong because the part concludes that she was shaping Saul's killer robots. This wasn't new because the top of the 2EC responded to it. It was responded to answered into the one argument that China is just as much surveillance. No, it's worse. The data evidence says the CCP collects biodata on a larger scale than the U.S. does, which means that China is materially worse than the U.S. when it comes to shaping global norms. Or not.
Good to go.
Do you want to card off?
Sure.
Cool.
Next, we're going to start this.
Thanks.